Welcome back, everyday Americans. You've rejoined the Constitution study. Well, I have a guest with me today. Chase Spears has joined me. Chase, I will let you explain your history and introduce yourself to the audience, but I think we're going to have a really interesting conversation. But why don't you start with a little introduction?
Hey, Paul, of course. Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I did 20 years in the Army as a public affairs officer, which I often tell people is God's idea of a practical joke gone way too far. But it was a great time, a great opportunity to serve. As a public affairs officer, I was a communication strategist. So everything that I do is related to how does the military build bridges to the public. And so having a journalism background myself and having studied journalism in college, that was something very close to my heart, and I enjoyed it. We did 20 years, hung it up roughly 2 years ago, and I really wanted to be freed of kind of the constraints that come with uniform because I believe the true fight for the nation isn't necessarily on a foreign battlefield, but it's right here in the idea space, and I wanted to get busy fighting there. So that's what we're doing.
Oh man, my idea of heaven, that's what we do here is John Jay, right? Read and study the Constitution, teach your rising generation be free. So when we reached out, we discussed there's a topic that's kind of fallen off the back burner, but it keeps popping its head up. And this is the idea of what the people that are called, they're called the Seditious Six. And I want to bring that up because, again, because of both your military and journalism background, I thought it'd be an interesting viewpoint on what's been said versus what's true. So the Seditious Six are a group of congressmen and women that basically posted saying that the military was it should not or doesn't follow illegal orders. Now, is that sedition?
The manner in which they did it, I would argue, is certainly at a minimum seditious in nature. And I want to back the train up a little bit. We had this concept of only following lawful orders, and we could get way deep, and I know we don't have time for that. But suffice it to say, every military member is trained that you are only supposed to obey lawful orders. Now, what's a lawful order, you might ask? Well, if I have a group of detainees who are not causing any problem and we've detained them, and a senior commander tells me, go and just kill them all, assassinate them all for no reason, that is something we would say is an unlegal, that's an unlawful order. And that's just kind of the most glaring example. And we talk about that to every military member in basic training, and that comes up again. What these congressmen and women did was they insinuated very strongly that orders given by President Trump are unlawful and should not be followed. And they did that in a video they released back in November titled Don't Give Up the Ship. And go back to Trump's first term. This during his first term, the progressives sought to drive a wedge between him and the military. And to some extent, they were very successful. You look at even what Mark Milley did during Trump's first term, openly bragging that he inserted himself into the chain of command and that he told senior military generals, I don't care what orders you receive from the White House, you have to run them through me, and I will decide whether or not you will follow them. I will decide whether or not they're lawful. That was an unlawful interference in the chain of command. That's a role he did not have as chairman of the Joint Chiefs. Fast forward to Trump's second term, when cabinet nominees were being vetted through the Senate for confirmation to the then Department of Defense, now Department of War. One of the lines that we saw repeated in the Senate was, will you only enforce lawful orders from the president? They don't say that when Democrats are sending up their nominees. So it's a strong inference
Mm.
of hey, anything Trump tells you will be unlawful. And so this video was a continuation of that, but it was going, this video where it really crossed a Rubicon was now they're going beyond the top politically appointed officials and they're sending a message to the individual service members on the line. Hey, you should think twice before you obey an order from this president, because if you obey it and we get control of the levers of political power in DC, we might hold you accountable. And that is a dastardly thing, and it is certainly seditious in nature. And Mark Kelly especially knows better as a retired Navy captain.
And you're right, it's the inference. It was interesting because what they said was absolutely true. The military members are not required to follow unlawful orders. I love the fact when they said, well, what unlawful order has Trump issued? And they kind of, because they didn't have one. It was, like I said, it was an inference. It was a manipulation, not just of the military, but of the American people, because their impression they're giving is, well, Trump's issuing all these illegal orders. Oh yeah, name one. You can't. But I also want to remind people, military personnel do not take an oath to follow the president. They take an oath to follow the Constitution and the lawful orders of their chain of command. And this personalization that we see, that's created such polarization. It's not just in the military, but again, you have the political branch. Now, Congress sets the rules for the military under the Constitution. They set the rules as a group, not as a group of individuals that are setting things up. So it really was this, to me, skirting the line, because they didn't say, ignore Donald Trump. They said they quoted something that was perfectly legal with kind of a wink, wink, nod, nod. You know what you really mean here. And again, the implied retribution, if you actually follow your orders, which to me, you look at a military, I did not serve, but to look at any military person I've talked about, and um, to threaten jeopardy for following their order, for following their oath, especially from a group of people that are really so bad at following their own oath. That I'm sure that did have quite an impact on both current and former military personnel.
Well, and think about it. In the video, they said, hey, look, if you have questions and you don't want to follow orders, we have your back. Well, that would be the first time, I think, potentially in recorded history, that Congress has had the back of military members. If my experience and reading of history is of any weight in this conversation. But you had Senator Lisa Slotkin later on. She was asked, what would you say to a service member in more detail on this? Like, you brought up the fact that none of these congressional representatives could name an unlawful order. But then Senator Slotkin took it a step further in another interview and said, well, I would encourage a military member to consult with their JAG if they have a concern about an unlawful order. Well, now you're trying to hand command authority over to the JAG. There were other conversations and other interviews where these same congressional leaders said basically the troops should assume, they should just assume that an order given under the Trump administration is unlawful. And they went on, and Senator Kelly was the absolute worst about this. He's been the biggest showboater on this. Like, the other Congress members have kind of moved on. He has got this, and he is not letting it go. He's like a stubborn dog with a bone, and he's just continuing to push this narrative. And he's gone on in other interviews and said, hey, look, these drug boat strikes, that's what we were talking about in the video. Okay, well, now you're saying that strikes to stop drugs from coming into the nation is unlawful. And they've had other operatives come out and say, hey, soldiers need to understand, if they do something under this president, if they obey orders under this president, we are coming after them when we get power. I mean, so it's absolutely a move to try to intimidate and to separate the military from the president. It's dangerous. It's unlawful. It's bad spirited. And we cannot tolerate this. I mean, I'm glad to see there's some action being taken against Senator Kelly. I'm a firm believer in free speech, but you cannot use military rank. You cannot use congressional leverage to try to pressure military members to just do your bidding. That's not how this works.
And you said that well, if you follow us, we've got your back. Well, Congress has no power. Congress passes the law; they don't execute the law. Meaning, there's really nothing these people can do. So it was a false claim to begin with. And yeah, there's a lot there. I like I said, I give them some credit for how they phrase it, like getting their toes right up over that line, rather than being some of the blatant stupid. But like you said, now we're going to turn it into, this is an act of retribution. And again, tell me, what did they do what are you claiming they did that was wrong? This is politics running amok. This is why we had the separation of powers, right? Congress sets the rules for the military. The president's the commander in chief. His job is to execute those rules. And if they think that he's doing it illegally, well, then Congress has the power to remove him. But what we're seeing again, it's this, call it Trump derangement syndrome. Just call it, the polarization that partisanship has brought us. I mean, I go back to George Washington warning us about the dangers of partisan politics. Yeah, I think there need to be some consequences when someone not on the floor of Congress, which is an important point, is basically encouraging sedition, encouraging military personnel to violate their orders, to violate the law, and with the promise of, "Hey, I've got you back if you get if when we get power again." It really shows how deranged and how detached from the Constitution reality, I'd say all of our federal government has become, and a lot of our states and locals as well. The idea of we don't even care what the law says. Politics is what matters. Donkeys versus elephants, and everything else falls a distant second place.
Well, I would take it even a step further and say it's really rich for members of Congress to be deciding now all of a sudden that they want to speak up about what they think is legitimate military action when Congress has been derelict in their duty to enforce their powers under the Constitution to decide when and when not to declare a state of war, which has not been done since December 8th of 1941.
Mhm.
Every single military action since then has been left to the power of the executive, and Congress has gone hands off and they've deferred and they've allowed the major, I would say probably the biggest economic output of the United States in my lifetime to become the war making powers of the US. It's out of control. It's insane. And Congress has been hands off for years, and they have allowed the administrative state within the Department of War to just decide what was going to be done. And they have allowed the Pentagon to box them in time and time and time again. And they continue voting to approve these budgets that just get bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger every year, that continue to be derelict in their duty to have any kind of legitimate oversight, that continue to rubber stamp promotions. But now they decide they want to say something about what military members should or shouldn't do. You, Congress, have the power. You have the vote. You hold the purse. If this really matters, you have the power to do something about it, but you don't want to actually do something about it. This group of the seditious six, they just want to get out and showboat, and they want to intimidate soldiers. If they actually believe something unlawful is being done, they have the power to stop it. But we see they're all talk and no action.
Right, because it's not Congress. These are individuals doing this. They may hold offices in Congress, but they're not doing it as part of Congress. This is a personal aggrandizement. You talk about Congress has for decades simply abdicated their responsibilities into the executive branch. Even the fact that people are calling it the Department of War is an abdication because the president doesn't name the departments. Congress does when they create them. So the name of the department is legally the Department of Defense. So it's there's so much of this on both sides where we're playing word games and stuff. And I've heard debates about whether it should be called Department of Defense, Department of War. To me, that's I don't want to call it name. Yeah, it's just playing games with names. But you're correct when you have Congress as a whole is saying we don't see anything wrong, but you got a half a dozen people who are political grandstanders. And again, that's nothing new. That's kind of what politics has turned into in this nation, which really is sad because each and every one of them took an oath to support the Constitution of the United States. And they are spitting and trampling all over that while claiming that someone else is doing it where they have no evidence. It just proves once again that, really these are the best 535 people we could find to be in the federal government, in the Congress of the federal government. God help us.
Well, and going back to the point about Department of Defense or Department of War, and I'll try not to go too far into this rabbit trail because I know we're limited on time, but I would argue that it has been the Department of War. It has been the Department of War for the entirety of my lifetime and going back many decades prior to that. It has not been defending the United States. We have been launching these expeditionary campaigns of foreign adventurism year after year after year after year. They have very little connection, if any connection at all, to actual U.S. national security. So to me, it was, Department of Defense is probably the proper name for it. I understand why they went back to the historical Department of War, which was its historical name all along. So this is just kind of a return to that. But it is all semantics, and
Yeah.
the fact that they changed the name does not by any means mean they have actually changed the culture of the institution, which is still filled with holdovers from the last administration. They're doing everything they can to undermine in concert with these congressmen.
Yeah. What's the old saying? How can you tell when a politician's lying? Their lips are moving.
Lips are moving. Yeah.
So, yeah, thank you very much, Chase. It's been great having you. Where can my audience find more work that you do and follow you online?
Well, thanks so much. I can be found online at just about any of the social platforms at Dr. Chase Spears. If folks would like to look at my work a little bit more, I have a website, chasespears.com. I post all of my writings there. So I write it for a handful of different places: American Mind, Red State, Real Clear Defense. I post them all to that site. And if anyone would like an update for any time I have a new article published, you can subscribe to my Substack, which is also at Dr. Chase Spears. And I post all my new articles there as well. You have the headline and a link to it. And I also encourage people, if you're interested in stories of courage in the ranks and out of the ranks, I have a podcast called the Finding Your Spine podcast that I'm really just have a wonderful time doing in concert with the Herzog Foundation over in Smithville, Missouri. And on that podcast, we tell the stories of people who are actually demonstrating courage and standing up for what truth, even when it costs them. And so you can find that anywhere you listen to podcasts, Finding Your Spine.
Excellent. Well, again, Chase, thank you very much. It's been a great time, and hopefully we'll talk to you again soon.
Appreciate it, Paul. Thanks so much.